So the period in which probably the majority of Iranians came to accept Islam runs from the 9th to the 11th century and probably somewhat afterwards. The evidence we have for this is indirect. We don't have, for example, records, of the equivalent of what we might have of church records. Instead, what we can look at is the narratives and the way in which they change to give greater account for a view that the writers were adopting a faith. And so, indeed, in my book, I look very carefully at a lot of these narratives and notice transformations, earlier stories retold in new ways. Well, so Iran's an interesting case, and in my book I argue that you have simultaneously two conversions. You have, on the one hand, a conversion to Islam in this period, and simultaneous to that you also have an emergence of a very new sort of identity that's Persian, and this required all sorts of processes of rewriting the past. So you have an adaptation of narratives that previously would have been seen as at odds with Islam. In particular, one of the major targets, of course, is the pairing of Persian and Zoroastrian identity. And the Sasanian past also, which is the dynasty that ruled previous to the Muslim conquest, the Arab conquests, that also comes up for review. So the Sasanian past is heavily filtered in the period after conversion. So a lot of times historians and indeed readers look at the materials I examined and try to mine them for facts. And a lot of times indeed you can find facts within the narratives that I look at. But also I think you can read these as a sort of stratigraphy, as a sort of layers of different writings and rewritings of history. So in my view, by doing a really quite thorough comparison of important seminal events of early Islamic history and their retelling in the periods from the 9th century onwards, you can see the ways in which community is coming to grips with its past. And what I particularly try to emphasize very much in the book is the very different natures of these identities that emerge. So we have, on the one hand, of course, an ethnic identity that I emphasize very much, this Persian ethnic identity. But for many people, this is not the first sort of frame of reference. You have identities of locality. You have all the way running down to alleys and streets emphasized in our local histories. What to me is the most, I think, important aspect of the book in a larger sense is the way in which the past is so much an act of creation. And when I think we also look at our own past, I see this very much in American history and British history. I live in London now. You can see very much how different groups over time rework it, and they have to. I mean, we remember what's important to us, and over time this changes. In terms of Iran, one of the arguments that's probably more controversial that I'm making is that Iran as such is not an identity that's first and foremost at all in this period. In fact, I've extensively combed using databases the sources to look to find the term Iran, and it's not a major term. So a lot of Iranians today might like to go back to the early Islamic period and assert a continuity of identities across time. And one of my more controversial arguments is to claim that no, indeed, that's not plausible.